Welcome to another episode of the Tech Transfer Podcast. I'm here with Jerry Rudisin, who's a serial entrepreneur and a friend of BYU and other universities here in Utah. Jerry, do you want to take just a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a six-time startup CEO after two stints as a VP in marketing. Long ago in the distant past, I got a bachelor's from MIT in double E computer science, master's from UCLA in computer science, and eventually, after some time in development, moved to the dark side of general management and marketing, and I've been there ever since and enjoyed quite a lot.
That's great. And so as a repeat serial entrepreneur working in Silicon Valley, what inspired you to move out to Salt Lake City and start working with companies here?
Well, it's interesting. I lived for 26 years in Silicon Valley, which is still the world's single biggest concentration of tech talent and the VCs and so forth. I moved there after living in Boston to take a job at the old Rational Software Corporation as VP of marketing. Rational was acquired by IBM in 2003, but it was world's probably most successful company offering software automation tools and technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So when I joined the company, it was about 11 years old and had just done 28 million in sales. And 8 years later, we had done 460 million in sales and had a market cap of several $billion. So it was a massive, massive success. Mm-hmm. And I was asked to move back to Boston to run a business unit there. And I said, nope, I'm staying in Silicon Valley. So I quit and had a very nice transition and ended up then running 4 venture-funded startups in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. Funded by people like Sequoia Capital twice, New Enterprise Associates, Redpoint, Menlo Ventures, U.S. Venture Partners. And a few years ago, my wife, who's an artist, decided that she was kind of burned out on her ceramic art after 20 years of making it and selling it around the world. And after putting it aside for many years, she said, hey, sweetheart, could we move somewhere else and get a change of venue, to use a strange term? New friends, new neighbors, new weather, new scenery, and it might be reinvigorating. So I said, okay, I'm kind of in the middle of my career here in Silicon Valley, but as long as we move to a place with a really vigorous high tech scene. So we looked at the places and didn't like most of them, but we love Utah. We'd been hiking here for years, mainly in southern Utah. So we said, hey, it's a family adventure. She and I and our then 15-year-old son moved from Salt Lake City. We knew nobody here, had no ties here, but we moved to Salt Lake City in July 2017, and it's been great. We love it.
Wow. And you've gotten to know people pretty quickly here, I would say. I know you're connected at University of Utah. You've worked with them. You came down here, I think, pretty shortly after you got here, came to look at BYU Tech Transfer and see what we had around here.
Exactly. In fact, I actually met you even before we moved. I think it was on the trip where we found our house. I met you because I was networking with people
that's right.
the previous year trying to find a house and really was impressed. I knew of BYU, of course, a terrific university, excellent STEM technology, science, and math and engineering department, especially in software. Knew a lot of startups from there. And you introduced me to Sean Warnick, very respected professor in the CS and applied math department. Sean and I hit it off. He's an MIT PhD. Actually, he actually had a startup when he was in grad school. So he was an entrepreneurial professor. And I got to know him and some of the team he was working with at BYU. And since he couldn't negotiate the license for his own technology, he enlisted me to be CEO. And then, of course, I work with you, which was terrific in negotiating the process. And I'm still actively involved in that company every day. Achilles Heel Technologies, formed from technology developed at BYU and a bit at Washington State University, which you also handled, which made that so easy.
Yeah, that was a great transaction. We felt we were looking around. The timing was so great. We were looking like who would be the right CEO, and then you pretty well walked in the door. And we're just coming from Silicon Valley with all this experience, even before Silicon Valley, with some great experience in software tech. And so it was just a really great fit. Can you, for people who don't know, do you mind describing Achilles Heel just a little bit what they do?
Absolutely. So Achilles Heel is essentially a cybersecurity company, and it refers to the vulnerabilities of Achilles, which is a cute name that Sean came up with. But cybersecurity is a gigantic market, and it's so important given the computerization and networking of pretty much everything in the world economy. And what Sean and the team at BYU did, and Sandeep Roy at Washington State did, was come up with some novel mathematics that makes it much easier to model a system, a cyber system, the hardware, the software, and even the human interactions, like how might you spoof a foreman with a cell phone somewhere and have him do something weird. But you can make a very, very elaborate mathematical model of all these factors. And the idea is then that we can identify the areas that would be the most dangerous in terms of the vulnerabilities if they were hacked or spoofed. There's a term called digital twin that you often hear about where companies will make essentially a high fidelity electronic digital model of some physical system, like a power plant or a nuclear power plant or an oil refinery. And so there's an element of the digital twin in what we do, but it's much more exotic. And it seems like it's a technology that can be very, very useful in this gigantic cybersecurity market. So we decided to form the company and to get the license from BYU to try to commercialize the tech.
Mhm. It's kind of it's a preventative tech. I think I know the answer, but what's the value of finding these places that are vulnerable within a system?
Well, it's like a serious disease. If you can find it and prevent it, it's way more pleasant than having to cure it later, if you even can cure it later. And it's interesting because the technology can be applied to almost any cyber system, and that's a gigantic market. And one thing you have to do as a small company is focus on some particular beachhead where you can hopefully get established and show the value of the technology, and then maybe go out from there as you gain staff and traction and financial success. So we decided to focus on protecting the U.S. power grid. And that's an interesting one because the power grid is something that all modern life depends upon. Even short-term blackouts cause real economic disruption. It's been estimated by serious scholars that if the U.S. power grid went down for 6 months, about 90% of Americans would die.
Wow.
From hunger, disease, looting,
Yeah.
destruction, gas pumps not working. So it'd be catastrophic. And that's very unlikely to happen, we hope. But any kind of technology that can help to identify proactively vulnerabilities in the power grid, whether the hardware, software, or human operations, could be a huge benefit to power companies, the grid operators, the interconnect operators, and really the whole infrastructure. So it's very, very exciting. A lot of work ahead to do, but we think the technology does apply very nicely there, and we can make hopefully a very good impact in protecting the power grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to us all. Yeah, and also when Achilles Heel was launching, there had been a wave of coverage of this sort of issue, I believe, of
That's
foreign
right.
national vulnerabilities. And
That's
every
right.
once in a while, I don't know what is it, every 2 or 3 years, there's another wave of coverage like that.
Right.
And we hope there's never a really big reason for there to be coverage, but this sort of prevention is helping us. I think one thing that's counterintuitive for people might not be thinking that there are certain type of hackers you don't need to be concerned about. If they're in part of the system that's not really vulnerable, maybe we
Exactly.
don't care too much.
Right.
They
Exactly
want to be
right.
selective.
And that's really the thing, and it's an issue because there's so many vulnerabilities in modern software. And it's not just a bespoke, a custom-made piece of software. It's how does your software operate with your database, with your browsers, with your cloud services? There's all these connections. It's an incredibly complicated system, and the more different versions of software using, there are endless vulnerabilities. There may be at any time thousands of vulnerabilities that you might have to face in the hardware and software, and you can't tackle all of them. So a technology like Achilles Heels that could identify the ones that are really the most vulnerable gives you a real edge if you're a chief security officer or a CEO of anybody involved in the power system, to be able to intervene and hopefully prevent problems before they occur by focusing on the ones that really would be a real threat if somebody, a real issue if somebody hacked in. And it's typically, and of course, now you worry about, rogue states, trying to hack.
Sure.
American adversaries trying to bring down the power grid. So it's not just some random hacker in a basement in his pajamas, but it's some very, very serious adversaries that we all need to worry about. So it's exciting stuff. And Sean and the team continue to do a great job moving the technology forward in BYU. And we're trying to apply it commercially with the company.
Yeah, and it seems like it's going really well. You had mentioned, of course, this came out of BYU, so Sean wanted you to be the CEO in part so that he wouldn't be on both sides of the negotiating table. So it was me and you talking about the deal. I will say you were incredibly reasonable to work with, and so was Sean. But from your perspective, what are kind of the ins and outs of tech transfer? What should people know working with the university?
But great question. You were phenomenal. And BYU was great. Very fair terms, very reasonable, very market oriented, and it made it super easy to get going. And interestingly, we funded the company so far by a series of SBIRs, Small Business Innovation Research Grants. And that's I actually never used that before. Sean had some experience with that. I'd always been involved in companies with venture funding. And this is a very early stage idea with Achilles Heel. And it's very, very hard to sell Silicon Valley investors or investors here, the great investors we have in Utah, on exotic math. That's a tough thing. Right. So it was very, very nice to be able to get SBIRs from several places. And currently we have a multi-year grant from the Department of Energy, from the US government, to really focus the technology on protecting the power grid. And a part of that grant is explicitly allocated to trying to commercialize the technology and find commercial customers we could work with to then get commercial revenues and go from there. So to answer the basic question, what to look for, there are lots of technologies that come out of universities. And very often they're licensed, and that's a perfectly to a bigger company, to acquire. That's true of a lot of molecules. At the U, where I'm involved, there are a lot of things in life sciences, and generally, if it's a new antibiotic or something, they're licensed to a drug company that has deeper pockets. But every so often, there's a company that comes along, a technology that comes along that really is worthy of a standalone company. We thought Achilles Heel was one such because of its potential applicability across many industries, and we saw a clear beachhead. So, having a tech transfer office that's a pleasure to work with is a big help. Also, having a founder who really is willing to put his or her shoulders to the wheel and help drive the company forward. Because I've known professors before who are terrific professors and innovators, but unless they're willing to spend time in the company, it can be kind of a damp squib. It just doesn't go anywhere. Because having them participate and stay actively involved in adding to the IP of the company and talking to customers is a real plus. So a committed founder, a set of founders among the faculty or staff who created the technology is really, really helpful. Very clean and simple terms, which you made very easy, makes it very easy. And like with any startup, is there a clear path to see, is this technology commercially interesting? Because and the jury's out for us, right? We're early stage. We think the technology is quite valuable, but the proof is in commercial customers working over money to use it. And our situation is, it's heavily a service at this stage. There's a software component that is standardized, and our aim is over time to make the software more and more the value proposition. But we know that in the initial deals, like what we're doing with this Department of Energy grant, there's a lot of new development of the algorithms, let alone the software to apply it to the power grid. So that's an ongoing process. So you have to be patient as well. But I think we have the right ingredients. The other key thing, which is great about working with BYU, is that there's kind of a farm team of grad students who come in that when they graduate, some of them come join the company. So there's a way to recruit people who are steeped in the technology, who love applying the technology, and who come out extraordinarily well trained with their programs, undergraduate and graduate from BYU. So it makes it easier to do the recruiting, which is a challenge for any tech company these days, anywhere in the U.S.
Yeah, that's super insightful. When people are looking at technologies, they ask us about patentability and is there a market for it? Obviously, those are important issues. But that third one, making sure it's a match with the technical founder or the inventor is so key. And Sean's great, and you guys have worked together so well. So you were working in the Silicon Valley environment, several companies, and then now you transitioned out here to what we call Silicon Slopes, right? And a different kind of company, it's like you say, early stage. Have the leadership lessons from your prior companies transitioned easily, or what's different or the same here?
Well, they transition easily, and it's interesting because California, Silicon Valley still has the biggest core of investors with the deepest pockets and the biggest talent pool. On the other hand, everybody and their aunt, uncle, mother, and father are trying to hire the same talent pool. And so one thing, I think it's markedly easier to start a company in Silicon Slopes now than it is in Silicon Valley, partly because I think Utah always rates as one of either the top or second best business climate in the country of all the states and territories. California consistently ranks worst or second to worst. And that's not so bad if you're doing something that's purely intellectual, a startup building software, because all you need is servers and people and renting an office space. But the problem is that the state is very badly run in California, and so it's a very sour business climate. It's super expensive to work there. You really cannot move people from out of state into California as a startup. You can do it if you're Oracle, Cisco, Google, Facebook, et cetera, but you can't as a startup. Whereas here, there's a big talent pool in Utah, incredible work ethic. The costs are much more reasonable. There's a talent shortage everywhere. That's true here as well. But at least it's easier to actually move people here. And between BYU, the U itself, Utah Valley University, Utah State, there's a gigantic talent pool here of people, including in the STEM areas, which we need, as well as marketing talent. So it's arguably easier to build a company here. But I think the lessons of the management style is really the same.
Okay, that's super interesting. In terms of the actual technical aspect of the business, you've been talking about cybersecurity. That's super interesting and timely to people. How do you see the future of the industry going, and where does Achilles Heel kind of fit into it?
Well, cybersecurity is a gigantic industry. People spend a lot on that, but it encompasses so many areas. So we have a niche that's focused on this novel technology for identifying the threats in these complicated systems. I think our challenge will be, if you want to be really successful as a commercial company, you have to move beyond just offering services. Now, there are successful service companies. You know, look
Sure.
at Ernst & Young Consulting or IBM Solutions, et cetera. But it's really an issue of selling people and time.
Right.
Whereas if we want to be really successful as a startup company that becomes a growth company and then a truly successful company with an impact, we have to transition from being something that's essentially very, very heavily services oriented, something that's more of a product oriented. Now,
Right.
most of the great software companies that were software product companies had maybe 20 to 30% high value services as part of their revenue mix, but the rest was essentially 100% gross margin software. So, and we knew that we wouldn't be there first, and the hope is to get there over time. And some of that is focusing on a given industry. So our expectation is that while applying our technology to multiple domains would lead to many, many different versions, there's a key commonality among the systems we'll be modeling in the power system. So that's the simplification for us. We can focus on doing the services needed, do the analysis, the modeling, weave it into some software that's more and more standardized. And as you start seeing revenue from that beachhead, we can then expand to others as we can staff up and hire people from the outside. So it's a gradual process. It'll take multiple years, but it's a matter of focus. See if we can really add value that's measurable and demonstrable in this area, and then go from there, and hopefully expand into other areas, and also broaden the beachhead that we have in the power systems.
I think that's a common approach. When I look at our kind of high-end software companies, these very technical products, often they start out by doing one-off consulting projects with companies, maybe just have to work through all the details, and then over time they commoditize what they're doing and they're able to shrink it into a product. Is that
Exactly right. Exactly. And that's a good model, because it's just not scalable to have everything be services oriented, especially something that's so exotic like this with the mathematics and the depth that you need. And that's a very, very common approach, a transition that companies make to become more of a product company. And we hope we'll get there, and the time will tell, but we're working actively on that. The other issue is, once we get some traction and get beyond this SBIR, this research grant funding, if we can demonstrate some commercial customers and document the value economically of our solution, that we actually averted this problem or save people money in this way, then it becomes a much easier matter to get funding to actually expand more rapidly. There's always that trade-off in startups. You can kind of bootstrap slowly, and that's a fine idea. But if you bootstrap too slowly, you lose the opportunity, because there's a time to strike when the iron is hot, so to speak. And if you wait too long by trying to bootstrap, you may miss the opportunity to become a truly successful, high-impact company.
right?
On the other hand, if you try to raise money too early, you either fail or you'll get so much dilution that it's a tough situation for the team that founded it and the employees who work there. There's a balance, but the hope is that we can push to get some validation, get some metrics that say this stuff really works and it's truly economically valuable. We could then, as you have a clear path to becoming a product company, get funding from venture capitalists and build much more aggressively from there.
Yeah, and so you have kind of a barrier to entry, because you have this patented technology. Like, your solution is entirely proprietary and valuable and unique, but at the same time, the problem is widely known, and so maybe someone else is working some other solution. So
Exactly.
it feels like there's a need to hurry, but maybe not, right?
Exactly. But there's always a need to hurry, because you want to stay ahead and keep advancing your technology. And as Andy Grove of Intel said, only the paranoid survive. He was quite right about that. You have to assume somebody's on your heels. This tech is very exotic, very powerful, and would really be hard to replicate. But it is mathematics, and you can't protect pure mathematics. We have software that we can copyright and use trade secrets, and we do have patents on the core technology. But the best way to really be successful is to just run really fast and hard, and get some customers, and learn from those customers. The big milestone for any startup that becomes a growth company is to really learn and get punched in the head a few times by super demanding customers. It's a plus, it's not a negative. You want them to kick you around, you want them to teach you, and that's something that really helps you sharpen your story, helps you sharpen your product. Demanding customers are so valuable. You can find a few to work with who really want to push you because they know if they can push you to make the solution even better, it's a win for everybody, and they're happy to help you, reach your product maturity along the way in a way that you wouldn't do nearly as quickly if you didn't have a true demanding commercial customer.
I'm thinking of who would be a demanding customer for you. It seems like every secure system could use this product potentially.
Right.
So have you kind of niched down, like, so you're a subset of the market, or you're just kind of taking opportunities as they come?
We decided to focus on just applying this to cybersecurity in the power generation system.
Yeah,
So
right.
we sell to power companies and these interconnect grid operators, but we can also see clear applicability to oil refineries, to air traffic control. Now that's a limited market because there are, countries tend to have one ATC system, but there are lots of oil refineries, chemical processing plants, nuclear power plants that have similar vital infrastructure that could be vulnerable. But we decided purposely that it's just too much of a scattershot approach to try to go one here, one there, one there. So we'll focus on the power grid and see if we can make some headway there, getting this critical mass of understanding and critical mass and refining the technology to the point where we think that we can take this elsewhere, knowing that there'll be some changes. But if we can end up with kind of a series of, here's a core set of software modules that basically model and analyze and visualize the results of mathematics, and then have essentially modules for different industries that are easily customizable. We have kind of a plan over many years of working our way to product company economics that can then be applied to multiple domains, which should be very, very exciting.
That's interesting. And that's another approach I see our high-end software companies often using, where at first they're just looking out saying everyone could use this technology, but then they invariably focus on something like the power industry for you, where they can really have a very focused selling point for people, right?
Exactly. That's something I learned in my previous startups, that some of them were focused on given industries, some were not. But it's just so important to get a beachhead and really show some real value with some small number of customers and maybe one industry or two. And then once you've built some credibility there, you've shaken the bugs out of the product. And it's also knowing the sales approach, because technology doesn't sell itself. You have to actively market and sell technology, and you have to have an argument for the economic buyer, the user buyer, the technical buyer, the coach, the typical strategic selling forces. And it's just hard to do that in a timely fashion if you try to look at too many different industries or customer types at once. But if you can figure out things that seem like high impact, where there's clearly an acute need and people are willing to spend money, then it becomes easier to accelerate the company's success by this focus. And that's what we've hopefully chosen well with Achilles Heel.
Yeah, seems like. Yeah, so you've alluded to the SBIR grants, kind of the ongoing involvement of the company with the university. Obviously, the technology came out of the university, but when you're running a company, a startup, on an ongoing basis, what is the connection to academia? I think you still have some research happening here. How does that work?
That's right. That's a real plus. So the ongoing research flows into the company through our license, in fact, we've actually donated some money to BYU and often pay royalties, which helps. So we're happy to do that per the agreement. But the ongoing tie-in to academia is important, because there are things that are happening there that really are on the cutting edge that private companies just don't do. And nobody in the power industry is even trying to tackle this kind of research that Sean and the team has done at Idea Lab at BYU. They just can't afford it. They don't have the staff for it. They're focused on day-to-day security issues and operational excellence and having very, very high uptime in the power grid. But you need an academic institution with deep expertise that's willing to fund this kind of research, or professors are willing to get grants to fund this research to be able to then make the kind of breakthroughs that we can then harness. And that's been true in so many other industries over the years. So many of the things we rely upon today, including the internet, started as academic research. Right. Yeah. And so now we have it commercialized everywhere. So it's a very, very happy relationship, very productive, symbiotic relationship. And, one of the strengths of the company is that Sean's ongoing involvement with BYU, and David Grimsman, who also became a professor recently, is a terrific guy, an early contributor to Achilles Heel, who's now at BYU. So in fact, we have a subcontract in our current grant to BYU. So we rely heavily on that university connection, weekly, if not daily.
That's great. And for the students here, it's such a great experience to be doing research that actually helps a real world company, that, your stuff's going to get out there. One thing you alluded to that people might not be aware of, typically, if we assign or license a technology to a company from BYU, and then there's follow-on research that's related to it, an extension of it, we'll usually just add that to the existing agreement at no additional cost, because at that point, we're completely aligned. We want the company to succeed.
Exactly.
This is kind of something we want to see happen. But
exactly.
well, great. So things are going well. You've made a lot of great strategic choices. What are some, have there been any unexpected challenges for the company or something that surprised you and you had to overcome?
Nothing really surprising yet. Staffing is always an issue. And one of the issues we have is just that it's a very competitive job market out there, and there's always never enough. There's never enough tech talent when you need it, where you need it.
Yeah.
So hiring's an issue. We have a few employees who have actually been out of state. We have some people we hired who left BYU, and we have to hire still fairly modestly. So, but that's all part of the startup process. You tend to pay people a bit less. You tend to work harder. And then hopefully you get some traction, get some commercial customers, get follow-on grants, so you can start to do more and build from there. So nothing surprising yet. Not really. No big surprises. Those
Okay,
nothing I
well,
haven't seen before.
yeah, one thing I love and that you alluded to there is that Achilles Heel hires a company like this hires high-end talent. You're hiring
Okay.
people, very talented people. They're getting good salaries coming out of university, and then stock options presumably, or some kind of incentive with
Exactly.
the company.
That's right.
And so, if you were a student, I think it would be smart for a BYU student to say, "Man, I would really like to land a job with Achilles Heel." Is it all computer science people you're hiring, or what type of people does the company need?
Well, so far it's all. I'm the only non-technical person. I'm pretty technical, but I'm not a contributor to the math.
Yeah.
But and mercifully, Sean and the team does that. But
Good.
we'd be moving backwards, not forwards, if I had to contribute to the math. But
Right.
it's all PhD or master's level computer science types today, or applied mathematicians. That'll change over time. I mean, at some point, it would be very helpful to have a product manager who's a fairly technical person, but can focus on adapting the solution to our intended market, tuning the product as we get to more of a product. All the selling now is done by me basically, and Sean part-time. Sean's a terrific presenter and very articulate about the solution and the problems that people face in cybersecurity and how we can help it. So it's very early, but it's quite typical. And I've seen this in past startups. It's maybe one business guy and a bunch of technical people, and then you build up from there. So that's all part of the fun. And the exciting thing about an early stage company like this is there are lots of technologies that are really interesting and they sound great on paper. And this is one of them. We think we have a chance here to show real product market fit and to show
Mhm.
that there's some real value to this in some important market. And that's what it's all about these early years. There's
Yeah.
a professor who used to be, I forget where he was, at Haas Business School in Berkeley,
Yeah.
and he talks about a startup is a short-term business structure intended to find a business model that's scalable.
Okay.
Because the idea is you go from a startup, and it's the same company presumably, but you go from the startup phase to then a growth company where you've actually figured out, hey, this stuff works. Here's how we package it. Here's how we price it. Here's how we market it. Here's how we sell it. Here's the group to whom we sell it and why we think they'll buy. And then you can start getting to a reproducible, scalable sales model. But we're a few years away from that at Achilles Heel, but at least we're doing the right thing now with exploring and trying to think proactively about how to make this into more of a product offering over time, and less a highly skilled professional services offering that requires PhDs, to do the research.
Right. Yeah. And so with your background, you've been the CEO of both kinds of companies, like the startup and more established,
Right.
a company that's nailed its model. So you could potentially continue on with the company if you want. At the beginning, most startups will tell us, well, we plan to exit in 5 to 10 years, something like that. Is there some kind of plan like that for Achilles Heel, or are we just working things out at this point?
Just working things out at this point.
Yeah.
Some of the companies I've joined that were venture funded were pre-beta and pre-revenue. One of them, they had done 300K in sales of a beta product, which you had to throw away soon afterwards because it was just not scalable.
Oh,
Then we got to 25 million and sold the company a few years later in spite of the telecom debacle. So I love this sweet spot of the early stage of working with the founders, figuring out the key idea, trying to apply it early on, and hopefully getting to the point where it's a real growth company and we're starting to get to cash flow positive and then profitability. So we're not
okay.
there yet with Achilles Heel, but we're making good progress, and we're looking for new business. And as I said, as part of this current grant, we're aiming to find the first couple commercial customers with whom we could work to then flesh out the technology further and give us more runway to then expand and to hire some more people to be able to expand faster.
Okay. Well, this is super interesting, and thanks for giving us an overview of the company. Sometime in the next couple of years or a few years, this is going to show up as an overnight success for people. So suddenly everyone will be aware of Achilles heel.
Right.
And so we need a record right now that this is you guys working away, making it happen. But
thanks, Dave. We're making it happen. But yeah, the overnight successes that take 20 years, I'm accustomed to some of those.
yeah. Well, good. So we have a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs. I hope they're watching this, BOU students. So last question, just what advice would you give to an entrepreneur who's just starting out?
Yeah, it's a great question. Don't be afraid to fail. It's, if I told my son, who's now a junior at the U in mechanical engineering, when he was a little kid, Winston, if you don't come back scraped and bruised occasionally from playing, you're not playing hard enough. Don't do anything truly stupid or dangerous, but it's okay if you get scraped. If it's okay if you fall, you get up again. Yeah. And entrepreneurs need to cultivate resilience and be willing to fail, be willing to try something. If you have an idea or a vision, try it. Yeah, you can do it on a small scale. You don't have to raise tens of millions of dollars to do it. You can try something bootstrapping. You can get meaningful market feedback. There are techniques for doing that, but don't be afraid to fail. Pursue your dream. Find other great people you can work with who are passionate and motivated. The other thing that is advice for entrepreneurs, and as you get into a growth company, I've seen this in many cases and had to fix this a few times. It's always better to have a hole in the organization, an unfilled slot, than hire a weak player.
Yes.
Because life is too short to work with stupid people or incompetent people or people who are subpar. So
absolutely.
The way
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's very common for maybe somebody to be a very, very hard driving entrepreneur and maybe have a partner they work with, and they start a company and they think, well, we have to fill this slot. We need a programmer, we need a person, we need a marketing person. Hold off for absolute quality, because that's the best way to success.
That is such good advice.
So, and if you tolerate somebody who's weak in the organization, you really dumb down and weaken the whole organization, and you maximize your chances of failure and not succeeding.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, hey, thanks so much, Jerry. This has been fascinating. Thanks for giving us the scoop on Achilles heel and your own career. And we will be back soon with another episode of the Tech Transfer Podcast.
Thanks a lot, Dave. It's good fun. Thanks. Take care.